When we think about American travesties, one of the first things that comes to mind is the Bay of Pigs invasion. Not only because it was embarrassment to not only the United States military, but to President John F. Kennedy and his administration, but because it put hundreds of innocent men's lives on the line and let a dictator walk away scot-free. This is an in-depth look of how this happened, what went wrong, and most importantly, how it changed history. The year is 1901. The treaty that all United States troops shall be withdrawn from Cuba was written. This was called the Platt Amendment, and it was written towards the end of the Spanish-American War. This led Cuba to gain control of their country, or at least that's what they thought. This treaty was meant to assist Cuban independence from outside intervention. However, it gave the United States control of outside international affairs, enforcing that Cuban independence stays intact. We now jump to the year 1934, in the midst of the Great Depression in the United States, which had a newfound interest in Cuba. Most provisions in the Platt Amendment were cut off in Cuban interest. Finally, in 1940, the Platt Amendment was scrapped for good. During this time, a certain man came in as president. His name was Fulgencio Batista. Under the Platt Amendment, many U.S. officials came into office as president. Batista was no exception. However, after he came out of office in 1945, he wanted power. So, in 1952, he came back, but not as president, but as dictator.
Fidel Castro was born on August 13, 1926. He was the son of a very rich father and was very bright. In 1945, Castro began studying law at the University of Havana. This is where many of his political and Marxist viewpoints stemmed from. Even at his young age, he began protesting dictatorships in Southern American countries like the Dominican Republic. He began making thorough speeches down-talking imperialism, and he only had one target. In 1952, Fidel Castro organized an attack, with 165 other revolutionaries, on the Macana barracks. Although the attack itself was a success, many were rounded up to go to prison with Castro. Some, however, were executed. Before Castro went to prison, he gave the speech, "History will absolve me." Castro was released in 1955, and went to Mexico where he gathered forces to overthrow a government. In 1958, Castro came back, and without the help of U.S. government, which withdrew help earlier that year. Batista was defenseless, so it was official. There was a new age for Cuba.
When Castro was appointed prime minister, the Cold War was at one of its peaks. The USSR and the US were at a standpoint. With a long-lived hatred for the United States, Castro quickly cemented himself as a communist. He promised that he wouldn't become a dictator, but this was not the case. Castro's first action was to jail all of his enemies, just like Batista did before him. He then took over the economy in nationalizing all American interests, increasing taxes on American products. While this was going on, the Soviet Union was planning missiles by Florida and were a firm trading partner with Cuba. All of this prompted an American embargo. However, there were more serious actions that needed to be taken.
The plan was simple. The U.S. would train Cuban exiles, then they would invade Cuba with aggressive tactics. The two air strikes were planned to destroy the Air Force. These planes were Cuban World War II bombers made to look like it was another Cuban revolution. The people would see this and then rise up against the new, crippled Castro regime. On April 17, 1961, the Brigade 2056, the group that was decided to lead the operation, embarked on the mission. However, it didn't quite go as planned. It seemed like a good plan until the landing zone was a failure. The Bay of Pigs is a swampy, secluded area, so the troops would have to travel 50 miles into marshy and muddy area, causing lots of equipment to be lost. The bombers then took flight and missed the target, making it apparent what was going on. This was then reported to the United Nations, who asked the U.S. about it. President Kennedy could either keep it up and covert the lie, or answer truthfully and regain good relations. Kennedy chose the latter. Now the Cuban government knew about the invasion. They sent the remaining Air Force and 20,000 troops. Finally, a set of paratroopers missed their target, and jets were made to help the hangar came an hour late due to a miscommunication. Finally, on April 19th, 1961, the invasion concluded.
Fidel Castro knew a lot about the Bay of Pigs and often went there for vacation. As a result, the locals were fond of him and were not likely to revolt against someone who treated them well and invested in their land. Additionally, Cuban exiles in Miami heard about the invasion and reported it to Castro. This caused him to move the Air Force out of the way. He also planned for an uprising, so he kept people most likely to do so secluded from invading forces. During the invasion, he helped sink ships. After many long months, Castro finally released the 1,013 troops for $53 million in baby food and medicine. There were many other attempts. For instance, Eleanor Roosevelt tried to raise $28 million for construction. The ransom conditions changed many times, with James B. Donovan eventually obtaining an agreement.
After this event, tensions heavily increased. This slowly escalated after photos of nuclear missiles in Cuba gave way to the Cuban Missile Crisis. This was the closest to extinction the world has ever come to, with nuclear annihilation within just a push of a button. The Bay of Pigs also led to a tarnished reputation for President John F. Kennedy, who was not seen in a fight anymore. Another attempt to overthrow Fidel Castro, who is now the most wanted man in all of America, was Operation Mongoose, led by Bobby Kennedy. It was an attempt to subtly weaken Cuba. 7 nations broke alliances with Cuba, but the operation was eventually scrapped in late 1962.
After this incident, America lost many relationships with communist countries that can still be felt today with places like North Korea. This event was also a major step for negotiations, and it made an example on how to negotiate with other countries in times of trouble. We can still feel the Bay of Pigs' impact to this day through the stories of survivors and the way we negotiate with other countries.
In summary, the Bay of Pigs was, and continues to be, an event shaping the world. From the beginning, by destroying the reputation of the entire Kennedy administration, all the way to today, where ripples of the incident that was the Bay of Pigs still makes its way into how countries confer.